There's a drug that can make you hand over your bank card, walk to the ATM, and thank the stranger who robbed you. There's another that turns human skin into something closer to a reptile's, one patch at a time. And there's one that's been sold as bath salts, plant food, and not for human consumption, precisely because everyone involved knew exactly what it was for. This isn't a list of things you'll find at a party. This is the strange, extreme edge of what chemistry can do to a human brain, and most of it you've genuinely never heard of. Drugs get attention in waves. Cocaine, meth, opioids, the household names dominate headlines because they're everywhere. But underneath that surface is a much stranger ecosystem of substances that never made it to mainstream infamy, not because they're safer, often because they're rarer, regional, or simply too unpredictable to build a market around. What connects them isn't a chemical family. It's how far they push the human nervous system into territory it was never built to visit. Start with scopolamine, sometimes called devil's breath, extracted from a plant that grows wild across parts of South America. In tiny, controlled medical doses, it treats motion sickness and nausea, nothing dramatic. But in higher doses, it does something almost nobody expects from a drug. It doesn't just alter your mood, it can wipe out your free will while leaving you fully conscious and cooperative. Reported cases describe victims walking, talking, and completing multi-step tasks, emptying their own bank accounts, packing their own belongings, all while retaining almost no memory of it afterward. The mechanism is brutal in its simplicity. Scopolamine blocks a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which your brain relies on heavily for forming new memories and exercising deliberate judgment. Turn that system down far enough, and a person can still follow instructions. They just lose the part of the brain that would normally ask why. Compare that to something on the opposite end of the spectrum, a drug that doesn't touch your judgment at all. It just doesn't let go of your body. Crocodile, a homemade opioid that spread through parts of Eastern Europe in the 2000s, earned its name from what it does to skin at the injection site, a scaly, greenish, reptilian texture that spreads outward from repeated use. Unlike heroin, which is produced in controlled labs, crocodile is typically cooked from raw ingredients in makeshift kitchens, and the leftover chemical residue in an impure batch is what causes the damage. The tissue around injection sites can die completely, and it's genuinely a race between the drug's grip and the body's collapse. Users have reported a life expectancy after starting regular use measured in a small handful of years, not decades. It's less a recreational drug at that point than a slow-motion demolition of the body that happens to also get you high. Then there's a category that barely resembles a drug in the traditional sense at all: synthetic cathinons, better known by their street shorthand, bath salts, flakka among the most infamous. These are lab-engineered stimulants, chemically related to a compound found in the khat plant, but pushed into far more potent, far less predictable territory. What makes them dangerous isn't just strength, it's unpredictability by design. Because they're synthesized in unregulated labs and constantly tweaked to dodge drug laws that name specific chemical structures, no two batches are guaranteed to be the same substance twice. Users can take what they believe is a known dose of a known drug and instead get a completely different molecule with a completely different risk profile. Reported effects have included extreme paranoia, dangerously elevated body temperature, and a wave of violent, agitated behavior that made headlines in the early 2010s, feeding directly into hospital emergency rooms that had no reliable way to identify what patients had actually taken. And here's where the split really becomes obvious. It's not that some drugs are simply stronger than others in a straight line. They're targeting completely different systems, and that's what makes the effects so wildly different from each other. Scopolamine attacks memory and volition. Crocodile attacks the body's tissue directly through impurity. Synthetic cathinons attack the nervous system's ability to regulate temperature and threat perception simultaneously. Three totally different mechanisms, three totally different nightmares, and none of them resembling the mental image most people have when they hear the word drug. Then there's a substance that doesn't chemically overpower the brain so much as briefly rewrite what it thinks reality is. Salvia divinorum, a plant used for centuries in specific indigenous spiritual practices in Mexico, produces one of the shortest but most intense hallucinogenic experiences known, often lasting only a few minutes, but capable of producing a complete, disorienting break from ordinary perception. Users have reported feeling merged with objects around them, revisiting childhood memories as if physically present, or losing any sense of being a singular person at all. It works on a completely different receptor system than most recreational hallucinogens, which is part of why the experience is so often described as unlike anything else people have tried. Legally, its status is a genuine patchwork, banned outright in some countries, entirely unregulated in others, precisely because lawmakers have struggled to categorize something that doesn't behave like the drugs their laws were originally written around. Stack all of these together, and a pattern starts to emerge that has nothing to do with popularity or how often you'd hear about them at a party. The most dangerous substances aren't necessarily the strongest. They're the ones that target something specific and irreplaceable: memory, tissue, temperature regulation, the basic sense of being one continuous person moving through time. A drug doesn't need to be famous to be capable of permanently rewriting who you are, or, in some cases, whether your body survives using it at all. One more thing worth knowing, because it explains why this list keeps growing every year instead of shrinking. Most drug laws work by naming specific chemical structures, which means underground chemists can often make a tiny structural tweak, one atom moved, one bond changed, and technically create a new substance that isn't covered by existing law yet, even though its effects on the brain are nearly identical. This is exactly how families like synthetic cathinons exploded into dozens of variants within a few years. Regulation is playing an endless game of catch-up against a molecule that can be redesigned faster than any legal system can respond to it. None of this is a warning label dressed up as trivia, and none of it is an invitation either. It's just what's actually sitting at the extreme edges of pharmacology, the parts most people never encounter and most headlines never explain properly. Every one of these substances started out as something else entirely: a plant used in ceremony, a medicine meant for nausea, a stimulant chemically related to a leaf people have chewed for centuries, before ending up redefined by how far someone was willing to push it. Somewhere between the plant that erases your will while keeping you smiling, and the lab-made compound redesigned every few months to stay one step ahead of the law, there's a much bigger question worth sitting with: how thin the line actually is between a chemical that saves someone from pain and one that quietly, methodically takes everything else from them instead.